Somewhere out there right now, a Honda owner is paying for a repair that a $5, $20, or $40 fix could have completely avoided. Not because they're careless, but because nobody ever told them that the small, boring maintenance task they skipped was standing between them and a bill with a lot more zeros on it. The frustrating part is that almost none of these preventable repairs require any special skill or expensive tools. Most of them just require knowing what to check and actually checking it on a schedule. Here are 7 Honda motorcycle repairs that could have been prevented for under $50. Repair number 1. A full chain and sprocket replacement. Repair number 1 is a full chain and sprocket replacement, a repair that commonly runs into the hundreds of dollars in parts alone once you include labor. And it's a repair that's almost always preventable with a bottle of chain lube and a few minutes of adjustment every few hundred miles. Chain kits themselves vary in price depending on the model and whether you choose OEM or quality aftermarket components. But even at the lower end of that range, the total cost dwarfs what a rider would have spent on lubricant in their own time over the same period of ownership. This affects chain-driven Hondas across the lineup, including the Hornet CB650R, Africa Twin, and Transalp. A neglected chain doesn't just wear out faster, it also accelerates wear on the front and rear sprockets, meaning a rider who ignored chain maintenance often ends up replacing 3 components instead of extending the life of one. Since a stretched, worn chain running on sprockets designed for a properly maintained chain wears those sprockets at an accelerated rate too, turning what could have been a single inexpensive chain replacement into a full drivetrain overhaul. In the worst cases, a severely neglected chain can jump or snap entirely, which is both an expensive repair and a genuine safety concern. The prevention here costs under $15 for a quality chain lube and takes only a few minutes, checking slack against your specific model's manual and cleaning and lubricating the chain regularly, especially after riding in wet or dusty conditions. Riders skip this because a chain can look fine at a glance even when it's due for attention, since dirt and old lubricant often mask the true condition underneath. And unless you specifically wipe a section clean and inspect it, a chain that's actually dry and beginning to rust between the rollers can look no different from a properly lubricated one under a quick glance in dim garage lighting. A simple habit of lubricating your chain every few hundred miles and checking slack monthly is one of the cheapest insurance policies available on any chain-driven motorcycle. It's also worth pointing out that climate matters here. Riders in dry, dusty conditions often need to lubricate more frequently, not less, since dust combines with old lubricant to form an abrasive paste that wears the chain faster than no lubricant at all, which means simply owning a bottle of chain lube isn't enough if the application schedule doesn't match your actual riding conditions. In the worst cases, a severely neglected chain can jump or snap entirely while riding, and beyond the mechanical damage that can cause to the engine cases or swing arm if the chain gets caught, there's a genuine risk of the rear wheel locking unexpectedly, which is why this particular preventable repair sits closer to the safety end of the spectrum than a purely financial inconvenience. Repair number 2. A warped brake rotor. Repair number 2 is a warped brake rotor, a repair that typically costs considerably more than the pads that should have been replaced first, since a rotor damaged by metal-on-metal contact from worn-through pads often needs to be resurfaced or replaced entirely. And resurfacing isn't always possible depending on how much material the rotor has left, which sometimes forces a full replacement rather than the simpler service a rider might have hoped for. This applies to every Honda with disc brakes, from the PCX and ADV 160 to the CB500F and CBR650R. Brake pads wear down gradually, and because braking feel often changes slowly, riders can adapt to reduced stopping power without consciously noticing performance has degraded, right up until the pad material is gone and the metal backing plate is grinding directly against the rotor, at which point every additional mile ridden is actively cutting grooves into a component that was previously in perfectly good condition. A full set of replacement brake pads generally costs somewhere under $50 in parts for most models, a small expense next to rotor replacement or resurfacing, and that price gap only widens further if a rider needs both the rotor and a fresh set of pads replaced together, which is exactly what happens once the original pads have worn down completely. The warning signs are usually there well before this point, a squealing noise under braking, a spongy lever feel, or noticeably longer stopping distances, and catching any of these early means a simple pad swap rather than a much larger repair. It's also worth remembering that brakes are one of the few systems on a motorcycle where the cost of neglect scales directly with safety risk, not just repair expense, which makes this particular preventable repair worth prioritizing over some of the others on this list. Even though the dollar amounts involved might be similar, checking pad thickness at every oil change, or at minimum every few thousand miles, is enough to catch this well before it becomes a rotor problem. It's worth checking both the front and rear independently, since many riders inspect the front brake regularly simply because it does more of the stopping work and is often easier to see, while the rear pad wears unnoticed in the background until it's already well past the point where replacement alone would have been sufficient. Repair number 3, cooling system contamination or water pump failure. Repair number 3 is cooling system contamination or water pump seal failure, a repair that can require flushing and refilling both the cooling system and the engine oil if coolant and oil cross-contaminate, a repair considerably more expensive and involved than routine coolant service, precisely because it touches two separate systems that would otherwise never need to be serviced together. This affects liquid-cooled Hondas, including the Africa Twin, NC750X, CBR650R, and Goldwing. Coolant doesn't just prevent freezing, it contains corrosion inhibitors that protect the water pump and internal passages, and those additives break down over time even if the coolant still looks visually fine, which is exactly the trap that catches so many owners. A fluid that looks perfectly clear can still have lost most of its protective chemistry. A standard coolant flush and refill following the intervals specified in your owner's manual typically costs well under $50 in materials if performed at home, and considerably less than what's required once a water pump seal has already failed and allowed cross-contamination, at which point the repair often involves not just the pump itself, but a full oil and filter change to clear any coolant that made its way into the engine's lubrication system. Riders overlook coolant service because it feels like a formality. Coolant rarely needs topping up between changes, which creates a false impression that it doesn't need periodic replacement either, when in reality the additive package can be substantially depleted well before the coolant level itself gives any visual indication that something has changed. Following Honda's specified coolant replacement interval, which is usually measured in years as much as mileage, is a genuinely low-cost way to avoid one of the more expensive repairs on this list. It's also worth checking coolant condition visually between full flushes, since coolant that's turned rusty, cloudy, or has visible particles floating in it is a sign the corrosion inhibitors have likely broken down ahead of schedule, which is useful information even if you're not yet due for a full service interval. Repair number 4, a dead battery and charging system strain. Repair number 4 is a dead battery that leads to a tow, a missed ride, or in some cases, strain on the charging system from repeated deep discharge and jump starts, since a charging system that's regularly asked to recover a deeply discharged battery works harder than one maintaining a healthy battery, which over time can shorten the life of the charging components themselves, not just the battery. This affects any Honda with a battery, but it's especially relevant for seasonally stored bikes like Goldwings and Shadows in colder climates. A battery that's allowed to deeply discharge repeatedly loses capacity permanently over time, which is a different problem than simply needing an occasional jump. And unlike a chain or brake pads, a battery's internal degradation isn't something you can visually inspect, meaning the first real indication of a problem is often the moment you actually need the battery to perform, and it doesn't. A basic battery tender or trickle charger typically costs somewhere in the range of $20 to $40 and plugs in during storage to keep the battery at a healthy charge without overcharging it, which is a small one-time purchase that can be reused across every future storage season and even across multiple vehicles if you own more than one bike or a car that also sits for periods of time. Riders skip this because a bike sitting in the garage doesn't give obvious warning signs until the moment you try to start it and nothing happens. And unlike a chain or a tire, there's no quick visual inspection that reliably tells you how much usable capacity a battery has left simply by looking at it. If your bike is going to sit for more than a few weeks, Connecting a maintainer is one of the least expensive and most effective preventive purchases available for any motorcycle owner, and it often pays for itself the very first winter you use it instead of dealing with a battery replacement or a tow. It's also worth noting that a battery that's deeply discharged and then simply jump-started without ever being properly recharged afterward tends to lose capacity faster with each repeat cycle, meaning the damage compounds quietly over a single storage season if a maintainer isn't part of the routine. Repair number 5. A slipping or prematurely worn clutch pack. Repair number 5 is a slipping or prematurely worn clutch pack, a repair on wet clutch Hondas like the CB500F and CBR500R that can cost considerably more than the price difference between the wrong oil and the right one, especially once you factor in the labor involved in splitting the clutch cover and replacing an entire set of friction and steel plates rather than simply topping off or changing a fluid. Using an oil that isn't rated for wet clutch use, often because it contains friction modifiers found in some automotive oils, can cause clutch shudder and accelerated plate wear over time. This is a mistake that's especially easy to make for riders who are used to maintaining cars, since the instinct to simply buy whatever oil is on sale doesn't create a problem in a car with a separate transmission, but on a wet clutch motorcycle, where the same oil lubricates the engine and the clutch, that instinct can directly cause a mechanical problem. Confirming your oil meets a JASOMA or MA2 rating, a detail that's clearly specified in your owner's manual, typically costs little to nothing extra compared to a generic oil, since properly rated motorcycle oils are widely available at standard prices and sit right alongside incorrectly rated oils on the same store shelf, meaning the fix genuinely is as simple as reading the label before you buy, rather than after you've already had a clutch problem and gone looking for the cause. Riders miss this because oil is oil to a lot of people, and the wet clutch specification isn't always obvious on a bottle unless you know to look for it, especially since many oils marketed broadly for motorcycles still don't clearly distinguish between wet clutch compatibility and general motorcycle use on their front label. Checking that rating the next time you buy oil and continuing to use it consistently is a zero added cost way to avoid a repair that can otherwise mean replacing an entire clutch pack well before it should have needed attention. This is one of the rare items on this list where prevention doesn't even require spending extra money, just spending the same amount on the correctly rated product instead of an incorrectly rated one, which makes it arguably the easiest fix on the entire list once you know what to look for on the bottle. Repair number 6. A snapped CVT drive belt. Repair number 6 is a snapped drive belt on CVT scooters like the PCX, ADV160, and Forza, a failure that leaves you without drive to the rear wheel entirely, and often happens without much warning if the belt has gone well past its service interval, since belt wear tends to progress gradually right up until the point of sudden failure, rather than giving a long, obvious decline in performance the way a worn chain might. Unlike a chain, a CVT belt and its associated rollers wear on a defined schedule specified in Honda's service manual, and a routine inspection is typically available for well under $50 at most shops that service scooters. If a belt does fail completely while riding, the scooter loses drive to the rear wheel immediately, which can be genuinely unsettling if it happens while merging into traffic or climbing a hill, since there's no gradual warning the way a slipping clutch might give a manual transmission rider. The power delivery simply stops. This is a repair that tends to catch commuters specifically off guard, since a scooter is often chosen precisely because it feels simple and low maintenance, which can lead to the CVT being the one component that gets overlooked amid otherwise conscientious ownership. Oil changes done on time, tires checked regularly, but the belt never inspected because nothing about riding the bike ever hints that it needs attention. Riders overlook this because a scooter's CVT doesn't give the same tactile feedback a manual clutch or chain does. There's no lever to feel or slack to check by hand, which makes it easy to assume the system is maintenance-free simply because nothing about riding the scooter day to day suggests otherwise, right up until the moment the belt has actually failed. Scheduling a belt and roller inspection at the interval specified for your model, rather than waiting for a symptom like hesitation or vibration, is the difference between a routine service and being stranded with a scooter that suddenly won't move under power. Riders who bought a scooter specifically for low maintenance easy commuting sometimes assume that convenience extends to the drivetrain itself, when in reality the CVT still has a genuine service schedule. It's just a different kind of maintenance than what a chain-driven rider would recognize. Repair number 7. A bent wheel or damaged tire. Repair number 7 is a bent wheel or a damaged tire from riding on tires that were significantly underinflated for an extended period. A repair that can mean replacing an expensive wheel or tire outright compared to the cost of a simple pressure check. And a bent or cracked wheel in particular is not a repair in the traditional sense at all, since a damaged wheel typically needs full replacement rather than any kind of straightening or patch fix on a motorcycle. This applies to every motorcycle on this list, since correct tire pressure affects handling, heat buildup, and wear pattern regardless of make or model. A basic tire pressure gauge costs a small fraction of $50, and checking pressure takes under a minute once you've built the habit, making it arguably the single cheapest prevention step of everything covered here. Cheaper even than a bottle of chain lube, and yet tire pressure remains one of the most commonly neglected checks across every category of rider, from brand new owners to people who have ridden for decades. Underinflated tires generate more heat and wear unevenly along the edges, and in more severe cases, riding on a significantly underinflated tire increases the risk of a pinch flat or sidewall damage severe enough to bend the wheel itself on a hard enough impact, since a properly inflated tire absorbs impacts the way it's designed to, while an underinflated one allows the wheel to bottom out against whatever caused the impact in the first place. Riders skip regular pressure checks because tires look fine at a glance, even when they're meaningfully below the correct pressure, since a visual check simply isn't precise enough to catch a real difference, and a tire that's 10 or 15% low can look almost identical to a properly inflated one to the naked eye, which is exactly why an actual gauge reading matters more than a glance. Checking pressure monthly and always before a longer ride is about as inexpensive as motorcycle maintenance gets, and it directly protects two of the more expensive components on the entire bike. Cold weather in particular tends to drop tire pressure gradually over the course of a season, meaning a tire that was correctly inflated in warmer months can end up noticeably low as temperatures fall, without any puncture or leak involved at all, which is exactly the kind of gradual change a monthly check catches and a casual glance does not. The bottom line. So here's the bottom line. Every single repair on this list shares the same pattern: a small, inexpensive habit that got skipped, followed by a much larger bill down the road once the neglected component finally gave out. None of these 7 fixes require special tools, mechanical expertise, or more than a few minutes of your time, which is exactly what makes them so easy to overlook and so frustrating to pay for after the fact. It's worth saying clearly that this isn't about blaming owners for these repairs. Motorcycles are complicated machines with dozens of small maintenance items, and it's genuinely easy for any one of them to slip through the cracks of a busy schedule, especially items that don't announce themselves with an obvious symptom until real damage has already been done. The riders who avoid these repairs aren't necessarily more mechanically skilled. They've just built a handful of cheap habits: checking the chain, checking pad thickness, checking tire pressure, and following the fluid intervals in their manual, and let those habits do the expensive work for them. What all 7 of these prevention steps have in common is that they cost less than a tank of gas, but protect components that can cost as much as a month of payments if neglected long enough. If you recognized one of these on your own bike, there's a good chance you still have time to catch it before it becomes the next item on someone else's list. Take an afternoon this week, walk around your bike with this list in mind, and check the things that take 5 minutes now instead of an afternoon and a few $100s later. If this helped you save some money down the road, consider subscribing for more honest, practical Honda content, and ride safe out there.